everyone, you welcome back to my channel. I'm Luchike Styles. In case it's your first time of seeing my face or coming across my channel, you are highly welcome. So in today's tutorial, I'll be quickly sharing with you all a detailed process on how to draft and sew this beautiful smoky flagger you see me putting on right here. It also has a smoky sleeve and also an elastic. So one unique thing I love about this particular gown I'm putting on right here is that it can be worn to church, it can be worn to wedding receptions, and it can also be worn to casual or regular outings, right? And another unique thing about this particular dress is that a smoky dress is always stretchy, like super stretchy. So I'm going to be showing you all a detailed process on how I achieved all of this. If you're a lover of good thing, I would always like to get intriguing sewing tutorial updates and pattern drafting. Please hit on that subscribe button because it's never going to be a thing of regret. And also to my subscribers, thank you all a whole lot for always subscribing to my channel. You are the reason I'm still doing this. Thank you all so much. So without much ado, I'll just get started with this tutorial. So here are the sewing materials I need for making this gown. I have my elastic, I have my scissors, I have my fabric. So for this elastic is about 1/4 inch. We all know that elastic have different sizes ranging from 1/4 inch to the highest inches you can think of. So right here, this is a smoky thread. It somewhat looks like the normal thread we make use of, but this particular one is stretchy. It's like a rubber, it's stretchy, so it's a smoky thread. Okay, so it actually has black and white. I really don't have any idea if it still exists in other colors, but the ones I normally see is black and white. So I have my yellow chalk, I have my scissors, and I have my straight ruler and also my curved ruler. So for this fabric, I have 2.5 yards, and it's a cotton fabric which I already went ahead to separate into two. So this one which I have my hand placed on is 1.5 yards for the lower part of my gown, and this one I have my hands placed on right here is 1 yard of fabric. So altogether is 2.5 yards. So this 1 yard, I'll be using it to draft out the upper part of my gown. Okay, so now I started off by folding this my fabric into two, as you can see right here. So I'm marking a line at the top of my fabric, which is going to be my starting line or my starting point. Okay, so right here on fold, you are actually going to divide all your measurements by 2 and not 4. So I'll be explaining the reason why later. So my bust circumference is 36 inches. Normally when you fold into 2, we divide by 4, but while you are making a smoky dress, you have to divide into 2. So my bust circumference of 36 inches divided by 2 is around 18 inches. Okay, so you can see I went ahead to increase the folds I have right here to get 18 inches. Despite the fact that I had 17 inches, it's still okay, but you can actually get up to your exact bust circumference divided by 2. All right, so by the time I measured this out, I got 17 inches and I was okay with that. So the next thing I want to start doing is to impute all my vertical lines of measurements. Okay, so the neck depth I'm working with right here is 5 inches, so I had to subtract it from all these measurements I'll be taking right here, and I placed that 5 inches on that first line at the top of my fabric, and I marked 8 inches, which is my armhole length. Still placing the 5 inches on that first line which I marked on top of my fabric, I got my half length of 16 inches and added extra 1.5 inches for joining allowance to the lower part of my skirt or my gown actually. So after that, now I'll come to that first line, which is automatically my shoulder line, and I'm going to divide my shoulder. So normally if I divide my shoulder is 7, but I'm not going to divide it. I'll just mark 14 inches at that point, which is my actual shoulder. From one shoulder blade to the other, for me is 14 inches, which I marked right there. Remember, this is a smoky gown, right? So from that point under my armhole line, I went up diagonally by 1/2 inch. So now with my curve ruler, I'm going to connect from that first line at the top to this 1 inch all the way to my armhole line. As you can see, I did right here. I hope you are not confused. Now from that point where I stopped, I'm simply going to connect this into a straight line. I don't really need to get my waist circumference because this is a smoky gown. It stretches by the time you actually run your threads on it. Okay, so let's proceed. During the course of this video, you understand everything I mean. Okay, So now the next thing I'm going to do now is to cut out. So I'm going to cut out the base, the sides, and also the armhole area. So for that upper part, I'm going to leave about 1 inch, which will serve as the hemming for my elastic to pass through, because I'll be also fixing an elastic to that top part. All right, so it's actually going to be the same thing with the back. I'll duplicate exact thing I have for the front. I'll do the same thing for the back. There is no zipper or anything added to this particular gown. So I'll cut out everything exactly the same way it is. So the back and the front are going to look exactly the same. Okay, so after this, now I'm going to separate these two pieces, because I'm going to show you all how to run threads on this piece in order to achieve your smoky effect. All right, so what I have to do first is to take note of the 1 inch, which is going to serve as the hemming allowance or the channel I'll be creating for my elastic to pass through, which I now went ahead to connect into a straight line. So after this, now I'm going to start marking lines on this my fabric. So you might be wondering why I'm marking all these lines on the right side of my fabric. Yes, that's actually what you're supposed to do. So I'm using a yellow chalk because this is a tutorial I'm filming. If it was a client's outfit, I would have used the white chalk, but if I do it on this tutorial, what I'm doing right here will not be so clear. Okay, so now you are going to determine the spaces you want in between your threads, right? So for me, I'm marking 3/4 of an inch, that's 1/2 inch and 1/4. So you can see how I'm marking it. If I mark the first one, I'll go underneath and also get 3/4 and mark this. But if you actually want your smoky effect to be very tight and like pronounced, I would advise you leave like 1/2 inch spaces. All right, so you're going to make all these points using your chalk, and later on you can use your stretch ruler to connect it together, or you can go ahead and mark the same thing at both sides of your fabric. So while you are actually running these threads on your fabric, you actually have to keep your hand very straight. So I did all of this now with my chalk and my stretch ruler. The next thing now is to actually fix our threads. So the reason I'm showing you all of this is because on your short sew, that is actually where you're going to fix your smoky thread. You're not going to make use of the normal thread. You're not going to fix your normal thread on your short sew. You're actually going to fix that smoky thread which I showed you at the beginning part of this tutorial on your short sew. So this is my sewing machine, and I'm just going to fix this. And for the thread that I'm using, at the top part of this my machine is a normal white thread. It's not a smoky thread. The only thread that is smoky is the one in my short sew. Okay, so don't get confused in any way, right? So I showed you right here so you can see, and that is it. So if you are actually stitching, the right side of your fabric should be facing up. As you can see, the right side of my fabric is facing up, like it's facing the camera. So the smoky thread should be at the wrong side of your fabric. So that is why I advise you actually mark chalk lines, very straight lines, so that you can be sewing on that line. All right, so but if you're actually good at straight stitching, then you don't really need to mark lines, but I had to mark this line for the sake of those who really need a guide. Okay, so if you mark the first, if you run the first line on it, you can see how stretchy this is. You might be thinking that this is too big, that is not going to be your size, it will be too big. Just calm down and continue watching, because you would see how small this very wide piece is going to be. Okay, but it's still going to fit me because I actually used my size while I was drafting. All right, so you can see I proceeded to running a stitch actually on the second line. So like I said, all of this should be on the right side. The smoky thread or effect should be at the wrong side of your fabric. So the more you are running these threads on top of your fabric this way, you realize that it will be getting very small. So I've run like almost 5 stitches here, and you can see what I have. So you continue doing this until you get to the very end or the base of this upper part of my gown actually. So if you want your smoky effect very tight, you can mark 1/2 inch. You can see mine is a bit big or wide because I used 3/4 of an inch. So this is what it looks like. So you just have to take your time and do all of this because you actually need to exercise patience, yes, but it's actually worth it at the end of the day. So I will continue doing this all the way to the end, and you can see that I made sure that I'm straightening my fabric, so I'm not stitching with the rumples, okay, because this thing will end up creating rumples if you're trying to stitch. So use your hand and spread it out while you are stitching, okay. So you can see I've done one part and this is what I have, and this other piece I'm yet to run a stitch on it. So right here now I've gone ahead now to run a stitch on these two, and you can see how small this is looking, but it stretches, okay. So this is it now. I used 1/2 an inch for this particular piece, and for the other one was 3/4 of an inch for my spaces in between my smoky threads, right? So the next thing now, I'll flip this to the I'm going to stitch the two parts together. I'm not going to say the back and front because I can't really differentiate the back and front from here because they are the same thing. So all I'm simply going to do is to arrange this properly on the armhole area, and I'm going to pin, because by the time you are done running your smoky threads on this your fabric, is going to fold, like you'll be having folds. So you need to bring it out very well and arrange it and pin. So make sure that you pin. So I have pinned one side, and I'm just going to stitch this using just 1/2 an inch. It's not going to be more than that, okay. So from the armhole, I'm going to stitch all the way to the end, and I'll do it to the both sides, guys. So this is it. So the only part now left for me to actually stitch is that upper part, which I'll soon be doing later on, okay. So now we are done with the upper part of this our gown. The next thing now is to work for the lower part, which is the skirt part. So actually I have a gown length of 38 inches. That is actually the length of the gown I'm working with. So I'm going to subtract 16 inches from that 38 inches. So right here I have 22 inches. This simply means that the skirt part of this my gown is going to be 22 inches long, and we all know that is a flare, right? So before I go ahead to cut that out, to get my waist for the skirt part of my gown, I'm actually going to measure out what I have on the waist part, on the upper part of my gown. So by the time you actually run your smoky thread on the upper part of your dress, is going to reduce a bit slightly, but you can actually stretch this out in case you want to have pleats on yours, but that's by the way though. So I measured around what I have on my waist here. So you see very well that I didn't stretch this. I just measured it the way it is together. I didn't stretch this at all. All right, please don't stretch yours as well, okay. So I got my waist circumference, and now I went ahead now to spread out my fabric. So I folded this into two, the normal way we fold when you are trying to cut out a fabric, okay. So now from the top part of this my fabric, I'm going to fold again downward. I folded from the side, and the next thing is to fold from the upper part all the way to the other side, so you can see what I have right here. So after folding, I'm going to fold this again in a triangular or in a diagonal manner. So you can see what I did right here. I hope it's very clear enough. So at this point now, the only part that is open is the part facing me. So after that, I went ahead to count how many folds I have right here, because the folds is going to determine how many inches I'm going to divide my waist circumference by, okay. So after counting, I had 6 folds. I had these pieces 6 folds. That was what I had here. So actually go ahead and count yours after folding, right? So this simply means that I'm going to divide my waist circumference by 6, okay. So my waist circumference divided by 6, I got about 2.5 inches or thereabout. But one thing with me is that I don't usually cut out the exact inches I get for the waist, because most times it can actually make your waist very big. So I normally subtract half of an inch. So later on, if it's not up to, I'll just go ahead and cut out extra inches, but I'll still explain all of this. I'll do this in today's tutorial. Okay, so for the length of this, my skirt, like I said, was 22 inches. I added extra 2 inches. 1 inch should be for the joining to the upper part of my gown, and this other 1 inch should be for the hemming, for the lower part of this my gown. So I hope it's clear enough, and you can see how I placed my tape and I was connecting this in a circular manner or motion. Okay, so this is actually how yours should go as well, and look at this properly so you assimilate better. So the first thing I went ahead to cut out was that waist area, which was what I marked right there. And if you have this circle after cutting out the upper part, which is the waist part, just know that your flare is going to come out very round and full and like perfect. Okay, so the next thing I went ahead to do is to cut out the lower part, which is the skirt length of my gown. So by the time I opened this up, I realized that the waist was actually small. So what I had there was 2.5 inches, but what I ended up marking was about 2 inches, sorry. So that wasn't actually up to the size. So me looking at that, I knew that it wasn't up to my waist, so I now had to add another inch and now trim this. So by the time you trim your waist to get bigger for a flare, if you trim the waist, it will get bigger or wider. So just be very careful as you are doing this so that you don't have excess circumference on your waist, because this particular flare, I'm not going to be opening it or dividing it. I'm actually going to fix it exactly the way it is, like this, to the upper part of my gown. All right, so you can see what I have right here after cutting, and I brought the upper part of my gown, which I'll be fixing, to the lower part of this my gown at this point. So now I'm going to place them right sides facing each other. Okay, so I'll place them right sides facing each other, which I'll now go ahead to start pinning. So I'll make sure that I pin this all around and it aligns perfectly on the waist area. So if you do yours and yours doesn't align, you just have to fold your skirt part or your flare the same way you folded, and now trim off it just tiny, 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 of an inch, depending on the spaces left for it to align with your waist. Okay, so that is it. And also for this second attempt I made, it didn't really align perfectly. It was just little space left for the flare to align with my elastic. And please don't stretch this if you are pinning. Don't stretch the upper part, which is elastic. Okay, so I trimmed off about 1/4 of an inch extra, and I went ahead to also pin around, and it aligned perfectly at this point. So I'm now going to stitch. Now you can see I already marked 1 inch for joining allowance, and I went ahead now to stitch all through, and I have joined the upper part of my gown to the lower part, and this is what it looks like. So it's coming out so beautiful, as you can see right here. So I'm going to turn this again to the wrong side, because I'm going to actually stitch up that allowance or joints I have right there. So at this point, if you have a weaving machine, please go ahead and weave these rough edges just little, so that it don't take so much fabric. Okay, so I'm going to pin this way, and I'm going to create a channel because I'll be fixing an elastic. So I'll be sewing this at the tip, facing on exactly the upper part of my gown, and also hem these upper parts at the top or shoulder area of this my gown. Okay, so guys, I've gone ahead to do that, and I came to show you all what I have. So I'm just trimming off those excesses that popped out from the joints I had right there. So for this gown, I didn't really stitch everything on that waist part. I left about 1 inch where my elastic will be passing through. All right, and it's at that point right there. So I'm working with a 1/4 of an inch elastic. Okay, so that is why the channel I created there is about 1 inch. So if you're working with ½ inch of an elastic, you should create about 1.5 inches channel space, okay, so that your elastic can actually pass easily with your office pin, sorry, with your safety pin. So guys, I did all of this now, and for this other end I'll stitch the elastic and now finish up the joints I had right there. So for this part, which is my neck, I am going to also pass this elastic through, and I'm going to stitch them at both sides to hold them in place, as you can see. So you're going to drag this, but not too much, to a reasonable amount. All right, so guys, I've gone ahead to do that, and you can see what I have. So at this point I was even considering not fixing a sleeve to this, but no, I wanted to fix a sleeve. All right, so I've gone ahead to cut out this rectangular shaped piece of fabric. So at that upper part, that is the part that is going to sit on the shoulder, I actually marked 10 inches plus 2 inches extra. All right, so from there I marked 1 inch, which will be for the hemming where my elastic will be passing through. Okay, so for the length after I did all of that was 8 inches. So from that point I created a curve to form an armhole using my curve drill. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to cut that part off. So after that, now I'm simply going to fold this way and create a channel. I'm going to sew just at the tip of that fabric, and I'm going to run about 4 lines of those smoky lines on the right side. So you can see I've gone ahead to do this. So I stitched, you can see, so but I'm yet to add my elastic to the upper part. But for this other sleeve I went ahead to do all of that. So this is what you're going to have after doing that. Okay, so the next thing is to actually fix this my sleeve to my gown. So from that armhole part, you see I came in by ½ inch. This is because this sleeve will be sitting on top of your shoulder, but it can actually go as an off shoulder, but for this particular tutorial I just want it on top of my shoulder. So I marked 1.5 inches inward like this, and I'm going to get one part of my sleeve and I'm going to face it right side facing my fabric on that armhole, that 1.5 inches I came in by, and I'm going to pin. So I'll pin this and all the way to the ends of my armhole. I actually opened up the armhole a bit so that this sleeve can align with the armhole on my gown. So I'll pin, and by the time I pin, I'll flip this to the other side of my armhole, and I'm also going to pin as well. So when I'm done pinning, I'm going to stitch exactly the way I pinned from that 1.5 inches all the way to the end of my armhole. All right, so I brought this closer for you all to have a better view of the explanation I'm trying to give, in case you are a bit confused, but I believe that this is clear enough for you all to get confused, right? So after that, now after stitching, you now have to flip it to the wrong side of your fabric and now go ahead and stitch up the sleeve part. So you might be wondering that the ends of my sleeve is actually rough. Yeah, I'm actually going to weave the ends of my sleeve or the hem of my sleeve, okay? But if you want to fold yours, you're actually free to do that. But this smoky effect is more beautiful when you actually weave the part where it is, okay? So that is why I decided that I'm going to weave the hem of my sleeve and also the full length of my gown, guys. So after that, this is what I had. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. Please don't forget to subscribe in case you haven't done so. So I would like you all to try this out honestly, and I'll also see you all on this same channel some other time. Bye.